For the Bosom Buddies, it's all fun and games until Nixon gets involved. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And this week we're going to be talking about Bosom Buddies, starring our old friends, the great Tom Hanks and the great Peter Scolari.
Yes, a couple stars before they were big stars, I think it's fair to say.
That's right. This is kind of their big break, right?
Yeah, and we've covered them on Family Ties and Newhart, respectively, which was a little bit after this.
I mean, I guess the Family Ties wasn't too long after this.
Correct.
And in a few short years, Tom Hanks would be Tom Hanks, or at least the first iteration of Tom Hanks.
Right. Well, what I find interesting is I think you could argue that the Family Ties Tom Hanks isn't all that much different than the Bosom Buddies Tom Hanks. However, Newhart Peter Scolari and Bosom Buddies Peter Scolari, it seems like two different performers. I think just because the characters are so radically different.
Yeah. I mean, I can see through lines, but yeah, I guess so, because Michael on Newhart is, well, he's a different character from everyone, right?
Right.
I was going to ask you, should we address the elephant in the room, which is that the DVDs have the wrong theme song?
Yes, that elephant in the room, yes.
Yes.
I guess maybe we should. It might be a controversial topic, but we don't necessarily shy away from that. So, yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, so when it originally aired, it had a cover version of My Life by Billy Joel. And in the DVDs and I guess syndication, it has this other song by Stephanie Mills, which is actually a pretty cool theme song. But you can, I guess just knowing, I can tell the footage wasn't cut to go along with the song.
Right. It is a catchy song, and I believe it was written or at least co-written by Chris Thompson, one of the show's creators.
Right, and then the lyrics actually probably fit the show more than My Life. I mean, it is actually about friendship and not just one person's life. And it doesn't have that sort of sad part, but still, you want the real thing. Although, listening to the real thing on YouTube, I don't think the Billy Joel really sounds like Billy Joel.
No, I'm not.
To me, he sounds like Joe Walsh.
Joe, yeah, I can hear that. I'm pretty sure that at least in some post-original network run airings, I think it did have the Billy Joel theme. So I'm not really sure which runs had the original song, which was a cover itself, and which ones didn't, and why decisions were made to that effect. But yeah, for sure the DVDs, there's no Billy Joel or Billy Joel wannabe at all on the entire set. And there is some other music missing, I think, too, which I didn't notice watching the episodes because most of these I haven't seen in, decades. But looking at some of the episode descriptions after the fact, I was like, oh yeah, hey, that song wasn't in this. So I think a few songs and musical performances have been removed, although many remain. And also, Mike, while we're talking about the DVDs, let me give a quick shout out once again to my parents who got this DVD set for me on my podcast wish list, and I think helped provide the impetus for us to talk about Bosom Buddies.
Yes, and I will give a quick shout out to my dog who chewed up the case for your DVDs and inspired me to buy a new set to give to you so that I now own it. And really the only thing she's ever chewed up.
Yeah. Was she making an artistic statement about original music or a protest against music replacement?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, loud and clear. Message received.
So I'll be careful if I get like those, the Fugitive DVDs or My Three Sons or something.
Or Felicity.
They replaced music on Felicity. What? They should have figured that out by then.
We talk about it, though. I mean, but the theme song is one of the most memorable sequences for me. And also, not just the theme song, but kind of you alluded to the visuals, like the softball catch, and all the things they're doing during the opening sequence. That is what has stuck with me probably more than anything through the years.
Although, I'm wondering even if, I guess they probably recut some of that for syndication because, like, the episode we're going to talk about has shots in it from what ended up being the series finale.
Right.
So unless they had filmed the entire season already, which I don't know, maybe they had, but I don't think it aired that way on network. They wouldn't have had that thing.
Right.
And that finale feels like we're pretty sure we're getting canceled kind of episode.
Yeah, well, and I find it interesting too. I'm not sure exactly which versions are on the DVDs, but this has one of the more fascinating comebacks of any show that we've talked about, because it had that run on NBC after its original ABC run. So, just like for one summer, NBC actually picked up something that had been off the air for, maybe about 2 years. Obviously to tie in with Tom Hanks' newfound box office success, and from multiple sources indicate that they did very well with the Bosom Buddies reruns. And that may be where I watched some of these, maybe not the original ABC episodes.
Yeah, if I saw it at all, that has to be where it was. And I didn't remember much about it other than sort of the concept and hearing about it over the years. But certain shots, I think, again, either from the credits or happening to see the episode, like, where Kip is pretending to ski. For some reason, that was stuck in my head. Or maybe from watching that Adam Scott thing, the greatest event in television history, where they recreated the opening credits. Because that was probably when they were doing, like, Family Ties and other things during the summer, right?
Right.
So maybe I did see it that. But it was, I know people, who are a little older than us, some people, have fond memories of it. Like it was almost maybe like a kind of hip show. Or at least, because it is very, we'll get into it more, but there's like a very free spirit to it, I think.
Yeah, in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't, I think. And I do think they got loose on some things, and while remaining very conservative on other things, which is interesting. And I also find it interesting that maybe about halfway through the first season, they modified the opening and added like a setup with like a voiceover introducing, the whole premise of the show and explaining why they're doing all this. They're kind of explaining, why they're doing this for anybody that has, questions about it. And, it's probably the kind of show where you do need something like that. But it's kind of interesting seeing like those early episodes where they just throw you right in there a little bit.
Yeah, one of my favorite little kind of throwaway bits was the episode with his parents.
Mm-hmm. Tom Hanks's parents.
Yeah,
Kip's parents.
And they're on the elevator with his dad, like explaining it, and you only hear parts of it, but they're explaining it the exact way the voiceover is.
Yeah.
So the concept, if you don't know, and this is the real, I guess, elephant in the room these days, and I don't know that we're going to be that qualified to talk about it one way or the other, but is that their apartment gets destroyed. These two buddies who are ad executives or ad creatives, Kip and Henry. Kip is Tom Hanks. Henry is Peter Scolari. And friend at work lives in a all-women's hotel or apartment building, and they cook up this scheme where they'll dress up as women so they can get cheap rent. And then also Kip is in love with her roommate, so it's a way to be close to her, which maybe is the most controversial part of it in a way. So obviously there's men dressing as women and using that as comedy, and whether that's okay anymore, and what it says. I will say the show is like never judgmental about the characters doing that, really. It's just sort of what they do, other than it being a scam, but there's no like moral judgment on it.
Yeah, and another thing that's interesting about it is, and going back into this, I was wondering, well, is this something that's going to be, like would be considered problematic today, and how was it handled? And I was surprised that in addition to really de-emphasizing the whole premise in the second season, which we'll get to, but like you said, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about it. I mean, every now and then the first couple of episodes, they would do some like gags with it, but I kind of think the show didn't even really have its heart in the premise, which maybe goes to, I mean, I've seen a couple different places, I'm sure you have too, but I don't know if they're all getting it from the same source. Like the supposedly, Chris Thompson, who had been on Laverne and Shirley as one of the writers there, they wanted to do like a buddy comedy, and they were pitching it to ABC, and I think it was Chris Thompson or someone else name dropped Billy Wilder, and we're kind of trying to describe the type of comedy they were going for, like maybe a little sophisticated buddy comedy, and they mentioned Some Like It Hot, and supposedly ABC or the network executives they were talking to jumped on that and said, oh yeah, have them dress up as girls, like Some Like It Hot. That's what they took out of it, and that's so then they went back and they built the show around that premise.
Yeah, like it seemed like, again, I'm reading the same stuff as you, that they really just kind of wanted to do a Laverne and Shirley with guys.
Right.
Which seems like an easy sell to me. Like, I don't know why they wouldn't have gone over without some gimmick.
And I think that is essentially what the show became. Right down to, like, the supporting characters are female. It's kind of like, I mean, they're not like Lenny and Squiggy, but, their confidants are on the distaff side. And they really... once they kind of set this up, and actually I'll say too, Mike, is that the pilot seems like out of place with a lot of the first season, because I think the pilot is actually really good, and it does as good a job as you can of establishing kind of a silly premise. It's filmed, not shot on video. It just totally looks different, and seems like when I was watching the first season, I was going back to that pilot and thinking, man, they kind of hooked me in with like a better than average pilot, and then they couldn't live up to that. It's almost like they put all that effort into the first episode and couldn't sustain it over the rest of that season. And I think a good part of it might be, that they didn't really have their heart into emphasizing the drag aspects of it. Not that it would have made it better to do that. I'm kind of glad they didn't, but it just seems like they were still finding themselves throughout much of that first season.
Yeah, and I find that the best comedy that comes from that almost comes from a sort of meta commentary on it, like there's a couple gags in this one, I think, that fit that a little bit, and even a thematic element, but just, doing different variations, because, whenever someone knocks on their door, they're, who is it?
Yes.
And finding different ways to use that gag. And again, when the more they reveal it to people, it just seems like, well, okay.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And it becomes more of a matter-of-fact thing in the background. There's like hints, I think it's in the second season, I think, when they're at the bar, at the Susan B. Anthony Hotel where they hang out, the bar/restaurant. I think there's a scene where the waitress like says, oh boy, there's two girls I see here all the time that look just like these guys or whatever. Could it? Nah, and there's a couple jokes like that where they sort of poke fun at the fact that like nobody recognizes them, and that's pretty funny, but it's kind of like that's really all they're interested in doing. I think people today some people might be appalled at this for a variety of reasons, but they're really not making fun of men who dress as women. They're not making fun of transvestites. They're not really doing any of that. And actually, the sexual politics, if you will, of the show are much tamer than you would think, even though the show itself was sold as kind of a sexy comedy. And in fact, Mike, did you watch on the DVDs the extra, the sales presentation?
I haven't yet. I started to, and I laughed when I heard Ernie Anderson, and then I set it aside to watch later, and I didn't get back to it yet.
It's basically like a 6-minute reel selling the show, but I think one of the things he says is that the hotel is filled with beautiful women, and actually I think something in the TV Guide, the 1980 fall preview issue, which I consulted, where they talked about Bosom Buddies. I think I saw a reference in there, kind of saying the same thing, like that was essential to the way this show was sold, was that there are these two guys in a hotel with beautiful women, and that the idea is not like the so-called, it's not the unusual aspects of them dressing as women. The idea that they were selling it on was almost like the titillation of these two guys being in somewhere where they're not supposed to be, being with a bunch of other women. And that's something that they sort of get at in the first episode or two, but then they really quickly discard that aspect. They don't even get into that hardly at all, because they're they're more establishing like these monogamous relationships like Kip and Sonny.
Yeah. Right. And Some Like It Hot has some of that, of those guys being where they shouldn't be. But yeah, you're right. This is pretty tame in that area. And
once you get through, after I think the first handful of episodes, more and more characters kind of drop out, and you don't even see like a lot of like other women residents even as like background. It really focuses on the core characters, and then once they all know what's going on, it really, any aspect of that becomes way in the background. And for context, when I was looking through that TV Guide issue, what another new sitcom that year, I think it was even on Thursday nights when Bosom Buddies premiered, was It's a Living. It's a Living was a show about waitresses in a high-rise hotel, and it was controversial because like the first season they were wearing like the outfits were considered very revealing, and some people thought that they were prostitutes. So they actually like changed the title of the show and like retooled it in the second season to de-emphasize those aspects, because people thought, and I think the show, I think you were supposed to think some of those things. Not that they were prostitutes, but there was a risque element of it. And this was ABC, in 1980, and kind of like this era where that was the kind of thing. So I think Bosom Buddies was originally, I think maybe ABC thought that they were getting this sort of thing, but I don't think that's what the show was interested in doing at all.
Right. I mean, there are references to things, and there are references to drugs a lot more than I would suspect in a 1980s sitcom. But you're right, it's not, they're not running amok in a sorority house.
And in fact, this is something I find interesting, and the whole central relationships I find kind of interesting and frustrating with how the show deals with them. But there's a couple, like, even one or two explicit references, and especially later in the second season, that make me confident to say, and I'm gonna be delicate because of our mindful of our 2 to 11-year-old demographic here. By the end of the show's run, it's still established that Kip and Sonny, who've been dating for quite a while, and exclusive, I believe, have not yet consummated their relationship.
Yeah. Even though the episode where they get together ends in a lot of symbolism for doing that.
Right.
Like fireworks and trains going through tunnels. So it was confusing when a couple episodes later they were discussing when they were going to do that. And I thought, didn't you do that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think that's actually, and I think that was bothering me in the first season too, more because they would have something where Donna Dixon, Sonny, Kip is interested in her, and Wendy Jo Sperber's Amy character, the great Wendy Jo Sperber.
Yes.
She's interested in Henry. And there would be kind of a like 1 step forward, 2 steps back thing where they would seem to be in one place at the end of an episode, and then the next episode would be like it never even happened. Especially with Henry and Amy's relationship, I think.
Yeah, and it's not like a thing. I mean, it's unrequited, but it's not unrequited in the sense that she's pining away and he doesn't know.
Right.
He definitely knows. He even indicates that, oh, maybe one day I'll be interested. Or that's like at the end of the first season, right? They have both couples have or potential couples have these conversations, and it's both the Henry and Sonny, the people being pursued, are like, well, you just got to let it have time, and if it happens, it happens. And it's kind of a weird acknowledgement of what's going on.
Yeah.
Or very honest. But then, yeah, especially Henry, I mean, they never really get together.
And they all work together. Sonny doesn't work directly with them, but often, like, works in association with them. I do think that by the second season, they have, and by the end of the show, actually, I think they have the characters where, I like where they have the characters, because they have Kip and Sonny are an item, but it's not like the center point of the show, and you don't have, Kip pining for her. And Henry and Amy sort of have this relationship where Amy does, but it's played for laughs, but there's not kind of like some aspects that are a little crueler, a little bit harder to laugh at in the first season with like her going after him and him being a little bit of a jerk to her at times. But they have it seems like they've reached a pretty good status quo where you almost think, well, eventually Henry and Amy are meant for each other, and you can live with it.
Right. There's even that episode where like Kip is imagining them in the future.
Yes.
And in every scenario, they're married. So it seems like everyone knows that's where it's going.
Right. But I think what really makes the show more successful to me in the second season is that they're getting to the heart of it. It's the relationship between Tom Hanks and Peter Scolari, the way their characters interact, and them just being like funny together, as opposed to trying to play out like soap opera aspects of these 4 core characters. I think they stripped a lot of that out and they removed the drag gimmick, essentially. I mean, it would come back in this episode that we're going to talk about, it does, but most their best friends know the deal. They're not hiding it from the people that they're interested in, or the people that are responsible for them remaining at the hotel. So it's kind of just getting back to the heart of probably being a buddy comedy. And to me, it's not always successful, but that show's a lot more interesting to watch than the first season, where they have this premise that is the elephant in the room, as you said, but they don't even really address it. Like, talking about another elephant in the room, what was one of the biggest comedy movies around this era was Tootsie, right? And Tootsie kind of gets into like some kind of deep issues, as you can in a movie, about what it's like to be a woman in a male-dominated society. It gets into like issues of gender and issues of love, like the nature of all this stuff. Bosom Buddies doesn't touch on any of that.
Right. That's true.
It seems like it's totally just, okay, here's these 2 guys and they look funny because they look funny dressed as women, and that's it.
Right. And it could be they live in a hotel of lizard people and they have to dress up as lizard people.
Yes.
It's what they have to do to live where they live.
Right.
And and there's also that complication of they're pretending to be, in their real personalities, the brothers of those 2 women. So they're always at the hotel hanging around.
Yeah,
in the lobby,
yes.
The rules of this hotel, the lobby men can be there, and then it has this coffee shop, which I find, or bar, or whatever it is. Bar and Grill, I guess. Susan B's Bar and Grill, which is kind of hilarious too, when businesses get it named after historical figures. But, it's convenient. It gives them a place to hang out. But I was like, how is this connected to this place? What is going on? Because the place seems, in the second season, Thelma Hopkins' character is running the hotel because the other lady just left for Bora Bora or something. And there's a lot of that stuff that's just like, well, okay. We're already in a weird premise I shouldn't think too hard about this, but I found in the first season, I didn't watch all of it, but that made everything more complicated.
Right.
And not in a good way. It's like, oh, they're being Kip and Henry right now, and they're constantly lying to it. And frankly, that's in the second season when they reveal it to the people that don't know. It's because they're tired of lying, which is good. Like, that's a good character thing, and I think it makes Kip in particular in the first season, to me, comes off, despite it being Tom Hanks, as kind of smarmy and like a cad.
Yeah.
And once he unburdens himself from that in the second season, he's much more likable.
Right. I mean, he's got like a singular obsession with Sonny too, which I guess it's important in the sense that, as I recall, he's very resistant to the idea of doing this, and that's kind of like the final thing that gets him to commit to it is the chance to be near her. But there's not really all that much driving him, and every now and then they kind of get into that a little bit, but it does seem like in the second season they can get a little bit more into things. Like I think in the first season they tried to end like a lot of episodes with a message, but it wasn't really hitting the mark very much, and I think they were much more effective the next season after the big reset as far as like giving some meaning to the characters and making them be more likable, as you say.
Yeah, and yet in general being, mostly about just being funny. I think it, even in the second season, when it tries too hard to be heartfelt, it's weird.
Now, I think in the first season, when is the show the best? I think it's little scenes where Kip and Henry are in the office with Holland Taylor's Ruth as their boss, and they're in like a big ad agency, and they're just kind of like messing around.
The great Holland Taylor.
Yes, thank you. They're just messing around, and it's funny. And I've seen several places, several sources have alluded to the fact that they did a lot of that. The two leads improvised a lot. I don't know how much that's true. I don't doubt that some of it is. That might be a little overblown, I suspect. But the fact is, they do have great chemistry together, and they're funny. So all the other stuff that happens in the first season, that really doesn't stay with me. It's really just the two of them. So then when they get into the second season, again, it's kind of a big contrivance, but they start their own little, ad agency studio where they can make their own spots. But to me, I think some of the worst moments of the show are when they have a lot of moments like costume humor, I would call it, which is funny because, that the show's premise built on, making fun of them being in drag or whatever. But they'd have all these episodes where they have excuses to have them put on a show or do things like that. Or when they're making the spots, those to me are some of the weakest parts of the show. Where when they're supposed to be like unleashed and doing their creativity to make like a humorous 60-second commercial, I found those to be far less interesting than just the two of them like messing around, talking with each other and being funny.
Although I appreciate that. I appreciate that it seems like the spirit of the people making the show was like, oh, let's like almost like a theater troupe or something. Let's just put on silly costumes and show what else we can do. Let's find another excuse for Peter Scolari to juggle.
Yes.
Or do a Bogart impression or something.
Or Rod Serling.
Or Peter Falk in the first season. That's the episode that you found really cringy, right?
Oh, the Revenge. I think it's titled Revenge. And it's like characters acting like totally unbelievably and essentially putting on a theatrical production to fool like one person and getting away with it. I didn't find that funny at all. I thought it was terrible.
And there are a couple episodes with flashbacks, which are fine. They mostly just threw me off because like their high school reunion. One, they're from Chicago or Cleveland, and they're having their high school reunion in New York, in the building they live in. But also that they graduated in 1975, and it's only 1981 or two, and it just seems like, I don't know, that they're that fresh out of college. Surprised me, but then, there's an episode where they're about to graduate, and it's 1978, so apparently they zipped through college.
Yes.
Even though it's still, they said it took 4 years. So that aside.
I mean, it's enough of a pain to go to your 10th anniversary or whatever, let alone having to go to New York City and get a hotel and everything.
Yeah, and then to happen to have it in the coffee shop in the hotel, the women's hotel where two men are living, but no one knows it. I mean, if they had said they had organized it, but hardly anyone knows who they are, so.
They don't even bother, like, explaining it,
yeah.
Let me address the other elephant in the room. Yet another elephant. We have not done on the podcast Laverne and Shirley yet. Laverne and Shirley was not a show that I liked as a kid. I have not revisited it much over the years, and we'll get to it eventually, but I'm just not a fan of that show. So if, creator Chris Thompson or anybody else involved with Bosom Buddies is trying to emulate Laverne and Shirley, as you said, commercially that sounds like a great idea, but artistically, I'm probably not going to be that excited about it. And I think, I'll just say right now, I think Bosom Buddies is a very inconsistent show. It doesn't live up to the promise of the pilot. And then the second season, unfortunately, by the time they really kind of turn things around and get in a good direction, the show ends. And they still have a few clunkers late in that second season too. But the second season is much better than the first one. And I would recommend anybody maybe start with that.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Laverne and Shirley and that world, one, they make a lot of Anson Williams jokes. But two, I didn't realize until watching this and reading up on it that, because of course it's also made by Miller Boyett, who everyone familiar with TV knows more from the TGIF stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't realize that they were, I guess, the executive producers of Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, and
right,
were essentially like the kings of ABC for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, I almost thought this was their first show or something. No. And they're just their names are on it as creators, but they're more like, what would you call them? The other end of production. Not story producers, but they're like money producers.
Right.
Packagers.
Like with the logistics and arranging things and the deals. And I think it seems like a lot of once they got into the 80s and 90s, they were not at Paramount, they were at Lorimar. I think in a lot of those shows, like Full House, Family Matters?
Yep.
Those are the kind of shows that seem to have more of a house style.
Yeah.
Whereas these ones are a little bit more diverse, is the right word. But yeah, they were huge. And Bosom Buddies is kind of it's an interesting place in TV history because it's only 37 episodes, a couple seasons, did not really take off. Yet people do seem to remember it disproportionately, despite it not being a big hit, because of the stars, the theme song, the gimmick, however you want to say it, and Tom Hanks, who could be somebody that would run away from this, to his credit, has never shied away from acknowledging it, and seems to enjoy revisiting it over the years.
Yeah, I think he has fond memories of it. He's one of the people that talks about that improving, but I think he certainly gives the impression that they were just having a good time. They were like the characters in the show. They were young and just had a chance, an opportunity, and were doing the most they could with it. And I guess that the Paramount lot was probably pretty fun too at the time. Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley and Taxi.
They were all playing softball.
That's right.
And, I will say, too, that one of my favorite TV reference books, Harry and Wally's favorite TV shows, volume that I have referenced often on the podcast here, I looked it up, and they were surprisingly positive about this series. They gave it 3 stars out of 4, and I think they called it one of the lesser-known, or one of the more underappreciated comedy gems of the 80s or something like that. And gave a lot more respect than I would have anticipated. So, I have mixed feelings about the show, but at its best, it's pretty funny, but I would not have expected it to get much critical appreciation from hardly any quarters, really. And the Harry and Wally, they can be tough on some long-running sitcoms, let alone some ones that didn't last as long. So that surprised me quite a bit. But I just point that out to say, hey, some people were, like you said, some people remember it very fondly, and some people liked it at the time, too.
Yes. Yeah, I was looking up Chris Thompson, because I'd seen that he was later worked on the Larry Sanders Show, but that seems a little bit of an outlier.
Yeah.
But he did The Naked Truth with Holland Taylor.
Ah, that's interesting.
Created that, yeah.
That was Téa Leoni, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that seems like a very similar style.
Yep.
Which, frankly, is about the only other place I've seen Holland Taylor. But I know I'm supposed to call her great.
Yeah.
And she's good at playing that type of character that she plays in both of those shows. So
I really think that the whole supporting cast is really good at what they're being asked to do.
That I think it's especially that again, the second season, it just seems to gel into a good ensemble.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't figure out what to do with Thelma Hopkins much, but
although they did that thing where, speaking of Anson Williams,
yeah.
You take somebody that has singing talent and actually has a legitimate singing career like she did, and give her an excuse to trot her out and have her sing in a couple of episodes. And so they did that, and she's pretty good. And they also do the thing where they get the boss character. They contrive ways to get her interacting with everybody, like with the whole cast. So they blur the lines between work and home, And I think it works pretty well because she interacts pretty well with the others as well.
Yes, but she's a nice foil to everyone.
Yeah.
Because she's a little older, and while seems to live a very free life of her own.
Hedonistic lifestyle.
Yes, a hedonistic lifestyle. She's, still more mature in the ways of business than they are, and can impart wisdom at times.
Yes, and that's something else that they do really well. I think in the first season, she's more like kind of, not an outright heel, but more of a tweener and a little bit more antagonistic to Kip and Henry. In the second season, they take some of the aspects of the character, her experience, and her being a little bit more proper in business ways than them, whereas being a little bit more wild in her personal ways. But they have her be more on equal footing with them, which makes the conflict more interesting rather than her just being their boss and them kind of going back with her. So I think they really, the adjustments they made with her character and bring her into the mix, I think that improved the show as well in the second season.
And the other big change is that you mentioned it, they start their own business, and she's a silent partner.
Yes.
So that makes it easy to get her involved in a way that, so before, Amy worked in their office too, so there were 3 of them that would interact with her, but there was no reason for her to interact with Sunny or Izzy or the other lady, whose name I'm forgetting.
Yeah, I think her real name was Lucille Benson. I think that's the actress's name. And, in that character, I don't think they needed to get rid of her really, but she didn't bring a whole lot. It's kind of like she was from a different generation. But, it's kind of funny because when you first see that character, you kind of assume, at least I did, that she's going to be like the Mr. Furley or Mr. Roper and be like appalled, at the notion of any hanky-panky going on. And there's a little bit of that, but really it just becomes like, oh, she's like older from a different generation, and that's why there's conflict between her and the younger girls. She's old. And Donna Dixon, the statuesque Donna Dixon.
Right, Mrs. Aykroyd.
Yes. They're separated now, I believe, which kind of breaks my heart.
Oh, and I should call him Mr. Dixon anyway.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
I think they made an announcement saying they intended to co-parent, and they were just separating, but they weren't going to live together or something. It was a very classy statement, as I recall.
Like recently?
Maybe in like the last year or two, I think.
They still have young children?
Well, I think they said maybe not co-parent as far as like taking their kids to school, but I think they said we remain like parents and partners or something, but just not a married couple or something like that.
Okay.
Lori, she does not like Donna Dixon's performance at all. She really can't stand that breathy faux Monroe business.
Always a huge fan of that either, but I think the character's interesting enough that it grew on me. Because she is I think just a pretty. She's got a lot going on. That sounds weird. Yeah, she's a nurse, but she wants to be a dancer. But she's not dumb, and she has her own outlook on life, and she's still independent of Kip. Like, she doesn't suddenly just become, beholden to him because they're together. And I think all that gets past sort of that surface breathy thing.
Yeah, I do think they take great pains to establish that she's not dumb and have her like sort of contradict your expectations several times. And that reminds me that there's an episode in the second season, I think, where Kip kind of goes after another woman and gets caught. And I just thought that was a horrible misfire.
Yeah.
And I guess the idea is that the tension that Kip feels is what drives him away. But it just seems totally off base and unrealistic with what we know about the character. And, you talk about something that doesn't hold up. To me, that stood out more than anything else in the show. Like, really, they had this. I totally didn't remember that episode. I do remember watching the show back in the day, but and I could remember specific episodes, reliving them, and even specific punchlines I remembered. But I didn't remember that they ever did an episode where Kip was so audacious as to, be caught kissing another woman right in front of her.
Yeah. I didn't like, especially I think because he wasn't as much of a cad in season 2 as he was in season 1. That didn't work either. It just made him really unlikable. And, the friends they knew about it and they didn't tell him not to. Yeah. Which is weird because they're all her friends.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where you expect there to be some twist and there's a logical explanation. But unlike 95% of sitcoms where there actually is a logical explanation, but it seems like there isn't, in this case, it's the other way around. There isn't a logical explanation. Oh, he was really doing this.
And then she's like, we can see other people, and kind of goes out with some guy at the bar and grill in front of him. And some of that's funny because it's Kip trying to be macho. And there's comedy to get from it, but you're right, it's a misfire.
And I do think one of the most unrealistic things about Bosom Buddies is the fact that she accepts him so much after finding out the nature of this deceit. They really don't even let that linger much. She pretty much forgives him, right away.
That's the episode where they get together.
Yeah. It's almost like she's touched that he would do this.
Yes, yeah.
Even though he's been deceiving her. That's a pretty big deceit, not to mention the whole... I'm getting kind of worked up thinking about it, actually. The whole fact that, if you think about it, they've been having, these girls' slumber parties and everything, and he's been, talking to her about, her so-called brother in this ruse. I don't know. I think she could have been extremely offended by that. And
it is kind of Shakespearean, but I'm being a little facetious, but
yes.
Not. A female character, it's usually a female character dressed as a man wooing on her own behalf.
Yeah.
Sort of. But I guess the reverse could hold too. And then, of course, in olden times, it was a man dresses, a woman dresses a man.
Yes.
But
and, just to be clear, we realize that this is, an early 1980s ABC sitcom, and I'm not expecting every episode to be a deep exploration of the human condition. But, at the same time, the show does, as I kind of read, the show does kind of try to send messages at the end and goes for something in many episodes. So, I think it deserves a little bit of scrutiny here and there.
So speaking of episodes, should we get into the one we're going to talk about?
I guess we should, yeah. The format of our podcast is, this isn't a format change in our podcast, folks. We do intend to get into an actual episode here.
This one is called Waterballoongate, written by David Chambers and directed by Joel Zwick. Not to be confused with Ed Zwick.
No.
Joel Zwick is not the director of movies like Legends of the Fall, but he is the director of shows like Webster and My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the movie.
That's the first thing that comes to mind when I was thinking of what, Joel Zwick. But he did a lot of sitcoms.
Yes.
And they're not exactly always Larry Sanders type sitcoms, if you catch my drift.
Well, I already did mention Webster, so. So we're talking better than Larry Sanders.
I'll just leave what I said stand on its own.
I wonder in TV sitcom pecking order where Joel Zwick falls. I mean, we know Jimmy Burrows is at the top.
Yeah.
Tom Sharonis, who did a lot of Seinfeld, I bet he's up there.
Right.
I'm sure, whoever is doing Lucy.
Yeah. David Steinberg did a lot of...
David Steinberg.
Yes, thank you.
But Joel Zwick's in there somewhere.
Well, he must have been popular, and he must have made the trains run on time because he did a lot of television. And
I bet, yeah. And, he does a good job on this show, keeping that energy up.
Yeah, I can't see when I'm watching, and he did a lot of these episodes, right?
Yes.
On Bosom Buddies. I don't really recall thinking some of my issues with episodes would be more like the general concept of the episode, the writing, not so much like specific directing choices. So
I'm not sure who directed the Hildy Takes a Dirt Nap episode, but there is, besides it being not a very good episode, there was like a massive continuity error in one scene where Amy's position keeps, in close-up, she's standing behind Spinkus. And in the wide shot, she's standing behind the Kippen Henry.
I have a feeling that wasn't Joel Zwick. That's not characteristic of a Joel Zwick directed show.
No.
He's kind of like the Rod Holcomb of sitcoms, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
The steady hand.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. If you are listening to Joel Zwick, we're sorry for any implied.
Yeah, we'd love to have you on the show to talk about. And I mean that sincerely.
Yes. And yeah, so when did this air? What against all that jazz?
Yeah, so this is a second season episode. It premiered December 11th, 1981 on Friday night. The first season of Bosom Buddies was on Thursday nights at 8:30, and then it moved to Friday nights at 8:30 on ABC. And so on this particular night, okay, we're thinking Friday night, 1981. What's the big juggernaut? It's CBS, of course. You got Dukes of Hazzard at 8, you got Dallas at 9, and Falcon Crest at 10. And this was only the second episode of Falcon Crest, so it was just getting started, but it was going to be a big hit too. And anything associated with Dallas was going to be big at that time. And just being after it, was a big boost. NBC, this is a real third place lineup on this night here. You got NBC Magazine at 8. You have McLean's Law, which was kind of a short-lived cop detective show with James Arness coming out of retirement to do that. And at 10 o'clock, a repeat, an encore presentation, if you will, of A Tribute to Milton Berle on NBC.
At night.
Yes, 10 o'clock on a Friday night. It just seems like they're burning something off here.
Yeah, well, they saw Bosom Buddies and they're like, oh,
yes,
we need to get cross-dressing back on TV.
And according to my research, Mike, it did only air from 10 to 11, even though I'm sure it seemed a lot longer than that at the time.
Right.
ABC.
NBC Magazine. I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, and it was just a generic news magazine. I think
Clearly.
Trying to latch on to the success of like a 60 Minutes. It was just something that was used, I think, to shore up the schedule when they didn't have a lot going.
I like that they were like, well, CBS took one clever name and ABC took the other one.
Yeah.
We'll just call it NBC Magazine.
Yeah.
Let's not even try.
Yeah. You have to wonder about the quality and the content of the show if there's that minimal effort put into the title. I think that's a good point. That leaves us with ABC. And ABC led off the night with Benson. Our show, Bosom Buddies, here was at 8:30. At 9 o'clock, Take a Trip to the Dark Room with James Coburn.
Oh, yes.
And at 10 o'clock, another show that didn't last very long, Strike Force, action show with Robert Stack. So what we have here is CBS rules Friday nights, and it's very hard to compete against that lineup. And we're kind of seeing the results of it with this schedule, I think. Or with both of these networks. They don't have a lot to offer. I mean, I think you could say, well, stuff was going to have a tough time against Dallas, but on the other hand, I don't think they necessarily put their best stuff against Dallas and whatever else was on CBS anyways. So, yeah, December 11th, 1981, Season 2, Bosom Buddies.
And it opens so their business is called 62nd Street, and they mostly make commercials there for very small companies.
And Mike, how about the sign for their business? I mean, is that not one of the most generic signs you've seen? Like that's a really unimpressive storefront. I think Lori speculated that maybe there's some kind of zoning regulation that prevents them from doing something really creative. But yeah, you got to see it. It's just not impressive.
I think isn't like one of the things next to it just like bar?
Yeah,
something.
Yeah, that's a fair point. There's not a lot around it that's interesting. So maybe there is something going on and the zoning commission's not allowing better signage.
Yes, and they bought it, by the way, from Henry's uncle, who was in trouble with a gangster played by the great Joe Regilabuto. So it's got some history.
Yes.
But it came with cameras and all sorts of equipment. And it's what they needed in their early 20s.
Yeah, I mean...
They were already getting antsy.
And, the execution of those ads isn't all that great, but it probably would have been tough. You know what it's kind of like? It's kind of like shows about sketch comedy that have troubles coming up with, like, good sketches. I find that a lot here. Like, they have troubles coming up with things that actually look like the funny ads that they're supposed to be. But I still wish the boys well, and I want their business to succeed.
Because they are the whiz kids.
I don't know if we've mentioned this, actually, have we? Is that Kip is an aspiring artist, like a painter, and Henry wants to be a novelist.
As far as I know, we never see Kip draw or paint anything.
No.
At least they show Henry typing every now and then.
Did you see, there's an episode where they sort of address this. They have, I forget which episode it is, but they have kind of like a crisis, and they talk about, the whether they can work and still pursue art, and they kind of come to the agreement at the end of the episode that yes, they can, but then they both have this quiet moment where they kind of look over at the desk, and Kip says, although it has been about 4 months since I've painted anything, and Henry looks over at the typewriter and says, it's been probably about 6 months since I've worked on my novel. And they both sit there like holding their drinks and staring at the table where their art supplies and the typewriters, and the episode ends like that on a very quiet note,
Yeah.
So they kind of acknowledge it. That was kind of an interesting end to an episode, but
yeah, I didn't see that one. I saw the one where that has their college flashback. Izzy's wondering if she can be a singer and still have a regular job managing that hotel.
Oh, right.
And they're kind of saying, yeah. This one opens with them, Kip and Henry, playing football in the office with Amy and being very loud and rowdy, having a good time. And the guys are wearing pads. It's big, noisy fun, and all three of those actors are good at being noisy, I think.
Yeah,
but not in a Maude way.
Right.
And Ruth Holland Taylor, and she comes in, and she's saying they really need to grow up. It's a business. What if a big client walks in and Kip's like who? Or a big client is Bilko's novelty store. And then Henry says they'll settle down, and Kip gives her like an Eddie Haskell kind of line, which seemed to get a really big laugh. I still don't know. Is this one of those shows that actually had an audience or what? But it seemed to get a big laugh.
The audience seemed to love this, even to the point where it looks, by all indications, it looks like Holland Taylor is actually like acknowledging it almost, and like just waiting for it to settle down before they go on with the scene.
Yeah. And the first time I saw it, I thought that's what was happening. The second time, I'm like, maybe they just needed time to sit down.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be.
I mean, it's funny. It's maybe not that funny.
Yeah.
And she leaves on a bawdy story, or in the middle of a bawdy story, we should say, involving her and a visit to West Point. And then after just a beat, they start playing football again. And then they're back at the Susan B. Anthony Hotel where they live. And it's before work, or before leaving, so they're mostly in their Hildy and Buffy outfits. And Henry's playing with two balloons, kind of a Senior Wences act with the balloons. Mm-hmm. And then he lets them go, and they deflate. And then Kip comes out, and he's like, do you want to take a time machine? And they go back to 1970 because he has a water balloon.
Yeah, and this is something you got to see to appreciate, but I think this particular way he sets this up is a good example of the energy that both of them bring to this episode. But again, kind of like referencing that Uncle Ned episode, Say Uncle, that we talked about for Family Ties. He's like, we're going back, 1975, 1970, and there's just like just the overall energy in this episode is really strong. And just little things like this are good examples of that.
And as he's going back, he's slowing down.
Yes.
And then, Scolari's getting, they're both 1970, middle school, and puberty and all this stuff. And so they get this water balloon and they go to the window and are looking for a target, and they zero in on Mort the hot dog guy who gave them short kraut last time. And Kip throws and misses and hits a black car. And then I don't have it anymore. I'm going to have to become an announcer and spend the rest of my life locked in a booth with Frank Gifford.
Yeah.
And the show is like full of current pop culture references.
It is, yeah.
And they come, and the next one is too, like so much so that I kind of forgot it. But they sit down and Henry tosses Kip a lifesaver, and Kip's like, "Oh, thanks, Mr. Fonda." Yeah. And I had to look that up. I was like, wait, did Henry Fonda do lifesaver commercials? And he did. Talking about how Grandpa Fonda liked them in 1918 when they showed up.
Wow.
And the one I saw ended with some girl saying, "Hey, aren't you Jane Fonda's dad?" and Henry Fonda like doing bug eyes.
It like right now, On Golden Pond came out right about this time, so it's not like he's a washed up relic or anything.
Yeah, like for some reason I thought the first time I saw it, I thought it was a reference to the the Mean Joe Green thing, the Coca-Cola kid thing.
Yeah.
But not. And then two guys burst through the door with the guns drawn, and they both, like Kip and Henry, turn and just do their "Who is it?" Which is it was a good version of that in the face of certain trouble.
Yeah.
So it turns out that the car they hit belonged to Richard Milhous Nixon.
Yeah.
And, I appreciate that they used his full name.
That is funnier when you use his full name like that in this context, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And these two guys, Fred and Del, who are a good fun, good comedy, hard-boiled cop types. They take him downtown, and, they're still dressed up, and, they're apologizing and everything, and then the Secret Service guys are like, "Well, how come we have no record of these people?" And they bring in, very briefly, a woman named Dr. Fritzley to administer the most thorough and intimate frisk of their lives.
Yeah.
And she's got like jumper cables and chains. And
I did laugh at that.
Yeah.
That was kind of like a slightly surreal note, like in a good way. Like sometimes that's not funny, but in this case, I thought it was hilarious.
Yes. And they send her out, and they're just like, we're really guys. And Del, I put in my notes, dopes out the scenario that they are.
Well, yes, nicely said.
Maybe they're Russians. That the Russians sent two agents into a women's hotel to form a communist cell. And I think Henry asked, "Well, why wouldn't they just send women?" And there's some joke about Russian women, but the whole time, I think the real thing here is that Henry is continually kind of giving wiseacre responses and goofing off, and Kip is trying to be serious about it. That he recognizes that they might be in some sort of trouble.
That's right. And also notice that the Secret Service agents, they barely comment on the fact that they're dressing as women. Like, they don't care about that.
No, other than what it could mean in terms of national security.
Yeah, they worry that it might be a ruse. But, another thing I like about these two characters is they're not like stereotypical, hard-boiled, 100% evil guys, that they're just guys trying to do their job, which I kind of like.
Yes, they have a hard-boiled attitude, but they're not. And they were on post-resignation Nixon duty, so
yeah,
they're probably not the highest people in the Secret Service food chain.
No.
But eventually they let them go. And, back at the bar and grill, they're relating this to Sonny and Izzy and Amy, who all think it's hilarious. And Henry thinks it's hilarious. And Kip very much doesn't. But the more angry he gets, the more they laugh at him. And even, like, Fred is watching, and he asks, like, "Is the Reuben good?" And then Kip's like, "It's a little fatty. Get the Salisbury steak." And they start laughing at that. He's like,
"Yeah.
What? It is a little fatty." And then back at the office, Kip is still trying. He's decided he wants to be an adult. That Ruth was right, and Henry is goofing around with all these novelties from Bilko's, no doubt, and including a Gene Shalit mask.
Yeah, Gene Shalit mask. Yes.
No, your mustache and glasses and big nose.
Of course, yes.
And Kip is having second thoughts about Bilko's because it's childish and dangerous. He starts coming up with all these weird situations that could happen. Like, that you could inhale a mustache fiber and go into your brain.
Right.
Which, I mean, you did have some issue with a fake mustache once on the podcast, right?
I did, yes.
Yes. So
That's right. Boy, I'd forgotten about that.
yeah, and then I really wonder about this. Henry puts a whoopee cushion under his chair and gets her to sit on it, and instead of making a typical whoopee cushion sound, it makes a slide whistle sound.
Yeah, that was a very unusual whoopee cushion, was it not?
Yeah. Her response is as if it made a whoopee cushion sound.
Yes.
You know, that it's gross.
Yeah, is this another example of music substitution? that plagues so many home video releases?
Yeah. I do wonder about, like, did it air on ABC that way? Was it a standards and practices thing?
Good question. Yeah,
Is it a syndication thing? Well, afternoon audiences can't handle a raspberry.
Yes, it was very bizarre. It's hard to tell for sure, but it does seem plausible that it could have, that was like dubbed in sound, but
It definitely seems dubbed. I mean, maybe not. It definitely seems dubbed in at some point in the process, but live or what? I don't know.
all right. If we ever have Tom Hanks on Battle of the Network shows, that's what we got to ask him.
I think so. Yeah, more than anything else.
Yeah, I'd like to think he'd have like a huge story about that too.
Right. We have some Uncle Ned questions.
Yes.
And that. And, you know, and Kip's like, hey, you know, someone with heart problems could sit on that and have a heart attack. And then Henry squirts Amy with a flower, and Kip comes up with this thing involving the water, like knocking out a contact lens and causing a person to stumble into traffic.
Yeah.
And then there's a plastic barf, and Amy runs off disgusted by that. She runs to the bathroom, so I don't know if she's running to, create some real art for what. And then Henry puts on like some of those springy eyeballs glasses, and like Kip's trying to be serious, and he's just sitting there with his eyes bouncing around.
Yeah, and I criticized costume humor earlier, but this was actually pretty funny. Kip trying to talk to him seriously while Henry's wearing those glasses throughout the whole scene, or throughout that whole exchange. That's pretty good.
It is. It's interesting to me that they chose Kip to be the serious one.
Yes.
Henry to be the goofy one, because I don't think that's usually the nature of the show.
I agree. It was unexpected when I was watching it, and I wonder if they just thought it'd be fun to do it that way and went with it.
Right. Maybe they wanted to give him something juicy to do comedically, and they just saw the dramatic potential waiting to get out of Tom Hanks.
There you go. That's a good explanation.
Is it a real one? I don't know. And then at home, Kip is reading, and I actually paused and figured out what book he was reading.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm curious. I didn't...
Yes, it's called Passages, Predictable Crises of Adult Life by Gail Sheehy.
Oh, okay.
And apparently it was like a huge deal back then.
I've heard of that book. I've not read it myself, but...
It's about midlife or maybe even earlier than like 35 to 40-year-olds having sort of a little crisis as they go into second adulthood, I think is the term there. But yeah, apparently it was a big deal back then. So I think that's pretty cool that they had him reading a book about what he's going through.
Yeah.
And, Henry's still trying to get him out of this funk he's in, and he keeps calling him like Kipper and all this stuff. And he's like, my name is Kip, which I still can't take seriously because his name is Kip. Other than Kip Wilson, this character, and Kip Winger, do you know of any other Kips?
Well, there was Kip Wells, who was a pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates years ago. Not a very successful one, but yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I guess he's named after a bar or something. Did you see that? Where did I see that?
Yeah, I'm not...
That like Kip and Henry's are names of bars in Berkeley or something?
Yeah, that does sound familiar. I thought you meant like in storyline.
No, not in storyline. I don't think they explain it. But and it's the same stuff. Henry's acting goofy and being serious, and he shows them, the Secret Service guys bugged their lamp. So Henry swallows the bug and then starts drumming on his stomach and singing Babaloo. And it says he's going to eat some Rice Krispies. And then he's like, where does it say when you grow up you have to stop laughing? And Kip does what I believe is a Desi Arnaz laugh, right? That he does in a couple other episodes.
Yeah.
And then the ladies come in and they have a cardboard box, and it has a water balloon in it. Whoever's holding it compares it to Charo.
Yeah, Donna Dixon. She said it's got more jiggle than Charo and a pogo stick, I think is what she says.
And, they want him to throw the balloon, and they're trying to encourage it. And he's like, it might hit Alan Alda. Then nobody would like me.
Yeah.
And just explains that he wants to grow up. And then, Henry's like, well, if you grow up, then we'll all have to. And can you carry that guilt? And finally, they get him to do it, and he throws it, and it hits Mort. And then he starts yelling, very Tom Hanksy yelling, and demanding a pillow fight. And this raises a question that I have, that these are very loud guys sometimes.
Yeah.
You'd think some of the other residents might have caught on at some point.
Especially when they have the window open.
Yes.
That's right, because there's a very strict policy, not about just living there, but you're not supposed to have anything first floor and up. The guys are just not supposed to be in the actual floors of the hotel.
That's right. So it must have really thick walls.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then in the sort of tag, they're writing an apology to Nixon, and it has a lot of references to his past, and Fred and Dell show up, and they said the surveillance has been called off, and one of them is moving on to quote unquote ballet dancer. I didn't quite get that joke, but
didn't he say like the ballet dancer? I mean, was this too early for a Baryshnikov?
That might be what it was.
Reference?
Yeah, I don't know, unless that was someone's code name at the time. I mean, I don't know why it would be.
Yeah, well, let's see. Who would be another active ex-president? Gerald Ford? I don't think he would be codenamed the ballet dancer.
Jimmy Carter? No,
yeah.
But they start taking out bugs, and there are like bugs all over the place. And that's the end.
Yeah, and even Kip is back to his old self. I mean,
yes.
He's reacting, like, I think, wasn't there a bug like in his pencil or something? And he's like,
yes.
Oh, my pencil, and he just like totally,
Right. Then they start shouting into a plate.
Yeah. Both of them are kind of goofing around.
Yeah.
It's kind of a feel-good ending.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, Kip's turn at the end happens very quickly. But again, it's like a 25-minute sitcom. And the episode itself, one of the reasons I like this episode is because of the pacing. And part of the pacing and the fact that it moves so fast is that, yeah, they're going to talk him into this pretty quickly, too. So, I accept that. I still think this is one of the better episodes I've seen.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, his turn to seriousness happens pretty quickly, too. So it's a question of how serious was that turn, really? Or was it just a few days of thinking about it? And then
right.
The first water balloon he gets, well... But they make some good points, too, that you don't have to stop having a good time or having a sense of humor just because you want to be a little more conscientious.
That's right. When we move to our all public broadcasting and public affairs shows format,
yes,
I'd like to think that we will still have a certain amount of fun and irreverence while we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when we talk about that egg show.
Yeah. Over easy, yes. Folks, you can stop all the cards and letters. We'll get to Over Easy eventually. It's on the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Eggs. So yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. I think for the same reasons you were saying. I mean, there's a nice message, but it is very fun and energetic. And we've already registered before. We're fans of Tom Hanks yelling.
Yeah, yeah.
And he does plenty of that in this series. This is sort of definitely closer to talk show Tom Hanks than actor Tom Hanks, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I like that. And yeah, and as much as we enjoyed the Michael character on Newhart, it is cool to see Peter Scolari juggling, doing impersonations, and just being totally goofy in many episodes.
Yeah, and playing someone who's likable.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think this, Waterballoongate, I think is a good example of the show at its best, focusing on, the two guys and maybe trying to get a message in there, but it's a message about their relationship and, who they are as people. But it's really like, it kind of unleashes them, for lack of a better word, but just like, within the situation, it's not the fact that them goofing around and stuff is within like an interesting kind of story. There's a framework for it, as opposed to those episodes where they're putting on a cable access show or they're doing a wacky ad for a client. It just has this, and dropping a water balloon on Richard Nixon's car is not exactly the most grounded scenario, but it works in this case.
It could happen.
Yeah.
Well, not now, but I mean, I guess you could still. I bet at least one of his cars is probably in his library, so you could probably drop a water balloon on it. But
boys, I'd hate to see a lot of innocent books get caught up though, and suffer water damage.
Yes, me too. And one of the things that came up when Kip's being serious is he even broaches the idea that maybe it's time for them to stop dressing up as women and get an apartment in a different building.
Yeah,
which is a fair point, but their business isn't doing that great.
Yeah.
They need more solid grounding.
That's kind of something interesting I was kind of thinking about. Like, are they still there because their friends are there and because it is a really good deal, or because they have to be still? And maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, even if they could afford a bigger apartment, I mean, they've said multiple times that it's really a cheap deal. It's safe, apparently. You know, but it's really small, too. We haven't talked a lot about their living space.
Yeah, the only bed is a Murphy bed.
Yeah, and they got a sofa that folds out.
Yeah, and a table, a portable TV, and a bathroom.
Yeah, and I think there's a closet.
Kitchenette. No, there's probably not a kitchen. That's why they have a coffee shop.
Right. Yeah, they pretty much have to eat many of their meals downstairs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they're sharing rent, at least.
They're also, well, not anymore, but we learned in the first season they were sharing pay. Or we learned in the second season that when they were working for the ad agency, they were sharing one $20,000 salary between them.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know what that was in $1981, but probably still not a lot for living in New York.
Right.
But yeah, it's not exactly huge. Now their office space is a nice, cool sitcom-y space, like a big open floor with like some walkways above it.
Yeah, walkways and big high ceilings.
Yeah, for filming wacky commercials.
And there's really good acoustics in there.
And then you got the restaurant and the lobby. Those are connected, of course. And, and the restaurant looks decent, I guess. I mean, I hear the Reuben's a little fatty.
Yeah, other than that, though. Get some food and beverage, yeah.
Yeah, host your high school reunion.
Yes.
So, yeah. You have other thoughts about Bosom Buddies? We already praised the cast.
Yeah, I think I've said pretty much all I can say about it, and I've watched all the episodes actually, so I've done that. And yes, it's an inconsistent show, but it does have its moments, and worth checking out for fans of the cast, I'd say. But you don't necessarily need to watch all the episodes like I did. And I would say just stick to the Joel Zwick episodes, but that's probably like 90% of them. Yeah. So maybe, go in with a little bit more discretion and you'll come out okay on the other side.
Right. I think Chris Thompson directed the one where they put on the show.
Ugh.
Which is that series, the last episode. Yeah, you didn't care for that one, huh?
Well, I did not, and I don't think it aired the last episode. It's for some reason it's the last episode on the DVD. Maybe in production order. I don't know what the deal is there. I'm curious about that, but
because it sure feels like a last episode.
Yeah, and the first episode is I think the pilot is very good. I remember watching that and thinking, oh man, this series is going to be a lot better than I expected. So if you have to see a season 1, see where it all began. Although there is a secret origin of, a couple of secret origin stories in season 2.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't think I have anything else other than, the Blue Ribbon nominating committee is going to have to wrestle with the theme song issue, I think.
Ooh, I had not even considered that yet. Well, I'm glad I don't have to worry about making that decision.
Yeah.
That's one case where I'm happy to pass that over to the Blue Ribboners.
Yeah. And then if they make a decision we don't like, we'll just question it on air, as always.
Yeah. That's tradition.
Yeah.
Or precedent, yes.
Yeah. If you want to give us your Bosom Buddy thoughts, you can email us at mailbag@battleofthenetworkshows.com or join our Facebook group or just like our Facebook page. And if you join the group, there's fun discussion, polls, and, and if you want to support our creative endeavors, we have a TeePublic store. There's a lot of cool t-shirts and other items with logos and mascots and caricatures. And in fact, Tom Hanks is in the caricature t-shirt or design.
Yes, we have apparel for men and women.
Yes, that's true. Or whatever your identity, I think you can find something for yourself.
That's true.
So, all right. With that, we'll say goodnight to Kip and Henry and Buffy and Hildy and Amy and Sunny and Izzy and Ruth and that other lady.
This episode brought to you by Bilko's Novelty Shop for the best in TV-safe novelties. This episode also brought to you by 62nd Street. No one has a better time selling your business. This episode also brought to you by Susan B's Bar and Grill, where a guy can be a guy before dressing up as a woman to go home upstairs. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.